Hi there, Sarah here from Scattered Pictures Art, and I thought we would do a Let's Create together today. And so I'm going to take you through the journal making process, and today we're going to start with making a cover. And I'm going to do this faux embossed leather cover. I saw this technique on Lori Marie Jenkins' YouTube channel. She's an artist in California, and I've adapted it a bit to suit my needs. And I thought I'd share what I did with you. So here is, so it's a patchwork style cover, and I've used 9x12 envelope as the foundation for the cover. And so I thought I'd just take you through the process of making this. So things you'll need: a metal ruler with a nice sharp edge for tearing paper. Of course, a paper bag. I've got one from Value Village, which is a secondhand store here in Canada, where I live. A large piece of paper, so I've got an 11x17. We'll trim this down. This is what we're going to put the patchwork pieces onto, just to arrange them before we sew them together. I am using a Cuttlebug embossing folder. The one I have is textile, and it looks like a damask type pattern, and so you'll need that plus your Cuttlebug or your embossing die cutting machine and the plates. I'm going to be using this is some inexpensive acrylic paint. It's burnt umber, and I don't know, I got this Michael's or the dollar store or something. Collage Podge or Mod Podge will work. I like this because it has the little flip cap. Some dye ink. I recommend this rather than a water-based ink because the dye ink will set and not react with other mediums. Some good glue. I've got Beacon 3-in-1. I've got a glue stick. And then for adding the gold and the color, I'm going to be using Prima Art Alchemy waxes. These are really nice. They come in a wide variety of colors and they smell wonderful. You can always use these gilding polishes as well. They're beautiful. They do not smell as good as the wax from Prima. So just keep that in mind, as they're a little smelly. Okay, so I think, of course, you'll need scissors and a sewing machine if you want to sew, but you definitely don't have to sew this on a sewing machine. You can just glue it together. But let's get started. Let's get all this out of the way, and we'll start with our paper bag. So the first thing you want to do is find where the seam is in your bag. In this one, it's near the side. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut down along that seam all the way to the bottom. Okay, I'm actually going to cut, I don't know if you can see that whole section of the seam out, because you definitely don't want that as you're making your cover. So cut that right down to the bottom. I'm just going to tear that off there and get rid of that. And then you want to cut the whole bottom panel of the bag away, because it's got glue and weird shaped layers, and it's just not going to be useful. Okay, so I'm going to save this because I'm going to use it for painting on, so that I don't get my mat any dirtier than it is. And now I have a very large piece of brown paper. So what you want to do with this is you're going to cut it into sections that will fit just outside your embossing folder, because you actually want some room to tear those edges once they're embossed, just to kind of give it more of a worn look for the leather look. So the embossing folder is about 4 1/4 by 5 3/4. So let's make it 4.5 by 6, and that'll give us some tearing room. So, of course, this size of paper is not going to fit into a paper cutter, so I'm just going to cut it down to start. And what I'm going to do, let's see how wide this is. So it is, there's 12. So, and 17, so we can't quite get 6. So we will do about 4.5 sections, 4.5 inch sections. And these definitely don't have to be straight, because like I said, we're going to be tearing them down later. I'm just going to cut this one about in half. And they definitely don't have to be perfect. I mean, you don't want perfect sizes on your patchwork anyway. Okay. So then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut these to about 6 inches. And I'll just cut this in half at the fold. So I'm going to finish cutting all these pieces and I'll be back to show you the next step. Okay, so I've got all the pieces cut, and the next step we're going to paint one side of each of these pieces, and we're doing the painting before the embossing. I just think the paint gives a little bit more weight to the paper and lets it take that embossing a bit better, just to avoid any tearing or anything. So I'm actually going to put this scrap piece down and just going to take my acrylic paint, and you can do this in different colors. Actually, I have, where did I put? So I did the cover with the brown and then the waxes on top. I actually did a test swatch, so this is with some black gesso and the waxes, and this is with some gold paint and black dye ink rubbed over the top, so that looks really nice as well. I'm going for more of a fall theme on the journals that I'm making, so that's why I am still going with the brown. So I'm just going to put some paint on here, and it does not have to be a perfect coat, just kind of get the paint to the edges so that you've covered the whole piece. If there's a bit of streaking or anything, it's fine, because we are going to be adding some more color after we emboss using the waxes, and also any of the kind of streaking or anything like that is really going to help with kind of that worn leather look that I want. So there we go. Just going to set that aside and bring in the next one. I am painting the colored side. I don't know that it matters too much, but just cover that up. Okay, so I'm just going to carry on, and I'm going to get all of these stack of pieces painted, and then we're going to come back and start embossing. Okay, I'm back. I have finished painting all the squares of brown paper, so just one side, and like I said, not too careful, like there's some streaks and stuff, and that does not bother me. I think that's going to look good. So the next step is to start embossing, and so we're going to get out, I have a Cuttlebug, so use whatever die cutting embossing tool you have, and this is the folder I'm using, and I'm using A and 2B plates for this. So just back that up. Now we want to make sure that we emboss these on the painted side, not deboss, which means you want the pattern raised up on the painted side. So when you look at your folder, one side of the embossing folder has a raised impression and one side has a lowered impression. So you want to make sure that the raised impression, okay, this side, is on the bottom so that when you close it and do your embossing, I'm going to turn this around, this edge is a bit straighter, that it pushes the pattern up so that it shows up on the painted side. So I hope that makes sense. I'm just going to run this through. I've had this Cuttlebug for years and years. I love it. I don't even know if they make them anymore. I know they're electronic ones you can get rather than manual, but I kind of like the manual one. Okay, so there you can see the embossed pattern, and if I hold it like that, I think you can see that it's raised up on the painted side. Okay, so you're going to go ahead, and I just keep the embossing folder sitting on here the right way and just keep replacing the page that I'm embossing, and that way I know that the right side is always facing up. Okay. And yes, I do it twice. I don't know if that's necessary, but I'm a little bit crazy, so there we go. So there's the next one. Okay, you can see it's raised up on that side. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to emboss this whole stack. Oh yes, I forgot. I flipped it over so I was not painting the colored side because it did show through a bit and I didn't want that. So just make sure you're painting the plain side of your brown paper. But I'm going to go ahead and emboss all these and then I'll be back again. Bye. Okay, so I've gone ahead and I've embossed all these. And now they don't look like too much yet. But now, for the next step, we're going to tear these edges. And I just kind of like the torn edge look. I'm going to go this way. I think it just makes it look a lot more like actual worn leather than having a clean cut edge. I'm just going to go ahead and tear each side. And so we end up with a little patch of paper that looks like that. Nice rough edges. It's okay if they're not torn perfectly. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take each of the torn edged papers and take your ink pad. So this is Rich Cocoa dye ink by Memento. And you're just going to run it across. Whoops. Just turn this over. The top of that embossed paper. And you want to kind of keep it flat because you just want the ink pad to pick up those raised areas of the embossing. And that's where it starts to really show up. And then I went ahead and I inked the edges of everything. There we go. So that nice embossed design really showing up using that ink. So once again, I'm going to shut off the camera. I'm going to go ahead and do that to all my embossed pieces, and we'll be back and we'll start adding some color. Okay, so I've got all the papers, the edges torn and the embossing and the edges inked with the Memento dye ink. And so now we're ready to start adding colors. I am using some fall colors that will go with the Digi kit I'm using, which is my one of my printables in my Etsy shop. And I'm going to be using Art Alchemy Antique Brilliance waxes in Lucky Emerald, Fire Ruby, Red Amber, and Amethyst Magic. So a red, an orangey, purple, and green. Okay, so what I did was I laid out the papers. Now we're going to be covering a 9 by 12 envelope, so we need about 11 by 14 to cover it. That's to give some room to wrap around the edges. So I'm going to just kind of lay these out, and I'm not sure if I'll fit everything in frame, but I'll do my best. And the only thing I'm doing is making sure that the pattern is running the same way. I'm not trying to match it up at all. Yeah, so last time it took 15 pieces to make a big enough piece to cover the envelope. So just okay, so let's kind of see how big this is going to be. So we've got 12. So we should have more than enough that way, and more than 12. So this, the 5 across 3 down is going to be big enough. And the reason that I laid it out like this is when I put the patchwork together, I don't want 2 colors the same beside each other. So I'm just sort of arranging it now so I know that I'm not going to be doing that. So when you use the Antique Brilliance waxes, they do have sort of like a dark tone to them. That's the antiquing, as well as the color. Okay, and these will have some shimmer, so I'm going to go ahead and I just use my finger to put it on. And I don't do the whole piece, I just kind of do sections. You will get messy doing this, so just be aware. That looks good. Do this one. So I just do all one color at a time. That way I don't have to clean my hands off as many times, because you don't want to mix the colors on your pieces. I really like this kind of orangey color, the amber, so I'm going to use 2 of them here. And I was saying earlier that these waxes smell really good. They have almost like a beeswaxy smell, so it's quite nice. I find the gilding polish has a real chemical smell that could be irritating to some people, so I still use it. I love how it looks, but I prefer these waxes. Okay, so that's the red amber. Let's do some of the Amethyst Magic next. And here. So I hope the colors are showing up on camera. Just pick that up for you. So I think, yeah, I've got them all. And so once you're done adding the colors, I'm just going to bring in the Vintage Gold Metallique wax, and I'm gonna highlight some of these. And this is getting a little dry. If these dry out, you can add a little bit of water, and if that doesn't work, you can add a little bit of glycerin, not too much because you don't want them really fluid, but it will help kind of reactivate them. Okay, and I'm just gonna go, and you can go over the other waxes with the gold, and it's just gonna highlight the embossing. The kit I'm going to be using to make the journal is the 16th Century Illuminated Botanical Kit in my Etsy, and it has gold tones, jewel tones. It does have some damask pattern kind of in the background, so that's why I chose to use the kind of damask folder and the colors that I'm using. I think it'll look really nice. Okay, so I've got gold added to each of the rectangles of paper, and now what we want to do is we want to put these onto our base paper that we're going to use. Now I haven't cut this down yet, so like I said, we're covering a 9 by 12 envelope. This is an 11 by 17, so we've already got the 11, and we need to cut it down to 14. And that'll leave us an inch on every side of the envelope for us to wrap it when we add this to it. Okay, so I'm just going to use my paper trimmer and cut that down to 11 by 14. So that's ready. Now I'm going to use my glue stick, and I'm going to tack down the squares onto here, and I'm just going to put glue in the middle because I'm going to do it in rows, and then I'm going to rearrange kind of the edges so that they aren't all overlapping the same. Okay. So I'll just go ahead and get that done. Okay, so I've got these all tacked down, and now you can see that the rows are all overlapping the same. So now I'm going to kind of play with these until I'm happy with the layout, and just kind of move some of these so that they overlap a bit differently. Okay, I think I'm happy with that. So what you can do is you can go around with your glue stick and glue all these edges down. I'm actually just going to use some of the Collage Page because we are going to coat this whole thing with the Collage Page now. Now you will notice that the Collage Page is going to tone down the colors. That's okay. We're going to go back in after we're done and add them again. I just like to add them at the start to help arrange them and get those colors. So I'm going to put some of this underneath certain areas here. Like I said, I like the Collage-Page because you can kind of squeeze out a bit onto your brush and just put it in where you want it. And I am using a matte, not a glossy. And it does not have to be perfectly glued down if you're going to be sewing, because the stitching will hold it in place. And that's why I've got the paper on the background as well, because that is nice and thin and it makes a good base for sewing these down. Okay, so I've got a little bit of the Collage-Page underneath, and now I'm just going to put it on top. Oops. Yeah, it needed a little bit more. That's okay. Get some underneath. Glue it down. And adding the Collage-Page is really going to help not just protect the cover, but it helps give it that feel of leather. Yeah, so I don't know, it just adds something to the texture that makes it look and feel more like real leather. Okay. So I'll go ahead and finish this, and then I'll be back. Okay, so I finished adding the Collage-Page to the top of this. You can see it has muted those colors a wee bit, but like I said, we're going to go back in and add some more once we're done here. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip this over, and wherever it is overlapping on the background paper, I'm just going to trim that off. So there we go. We now have our 11 by 14 cover piece, and the next step is to, if you are going to sew, is to go in and sew. I'm not going to be able to film the sewing. I don't think I can get my sewing machine in frame. Let's see. You never know. Well, I might be able to do it. So what I'm going to do is, don't worry about sewing around the outer edge because that's going to be folded over. So you're just going to sew along any of the seams on the page. Okay, so let me just get this plugged in. I'm using kind of gold tone thread, so you can use whatever you have. I like how the gold tone worked on this cover, and then when you go back in with the wax, it tones in and the stitching doesn't quite stand out as much. So I'm going to use a straight stitch on all of these. Let me just get my setting right here. Okay, and we'll get started. And I don't think you can actually see. No. Okay, so I'll do the first little bit and show you, and then I'll finish the rest off camera. So I'm not back stitching. Sorry for the noise. And I've got my stitch length at 3 and my tension at 4, and I am using a leather needle. That's what I always use for sewing paper. It just seems to work for me. Okay, so there's the first seam. I'll come back in and I'll do this one. And like I said, I don't bother back stitching. What I'll do when I cut the threads off is I'll go back in with a little bit of the Collage-Page and just kind of seal where I've cut the threads so that it doesn't start to unravel. Okay, so I will finish the sewing and I'll be back. Okay, so I finished the sewing. there, and I did put a little bit extra Collage Podge on the where I cut the threads if I had to do that in the middle. Okay, and it doesn't really matter about the threads on the back here, it's all going to be glued underneath, but get rid of some of these. Okay, and here is my 9x12 envelope. So what I'm going to do is I am just going to use some of my 3-in-1, and I'm going to seal it. And I'm going to fold it in half to find the center, which is where the signature will be sewn in. I'm not sure if I'm going to do 1 or 2 signatures in these books yet. Once we start to assemble those, I'll decide. Okay, so now we know where center is. I'm going to reinforce the center. This is a piece of Tyvek. I bought a large roll of this on Amazon. It wasn't too expensive. You can also, at least in Canada and the US, buy Tyvek envelopes at an office supply store or the post office. It just helps strengthen the spine so that your stitching for your signature doesn't rip through. Get that. I'm just using my ruler to smooth it out, make sure that the glue is well spread out. And I'm going to trim off the excess that's hanging over the edge here. Just, oh, come on. There we go. And off this side. There we go. It doesn't have to be perfect because it is going to be wrapped, but you just don't want any bulk there to interfere with when we wrap this around the cover. Okay, so I'm going to give this a fold in half as well, and I want the pattern going that way, I think. So I'm not creasing this very hard. I just kind of want to get an idea of where center is so I know where to lay the envelope down for gluing. Okay, so we are ready to glue the envelope onto the faux embossed leather cover. So I'm going to go right down the center here. And I'm going to do one side first. Now again, I am going to stitch around the edge of this, so it doesn't have to be perfectly glued down, but I just don't want it to shift at all. So you're going to try and center this on your cover piece. Have about an inch all the way around the outside. Actually going to get a plastic ruler here just to, and again I'm just using the ruler to help flatten this out. You could use a brayer if you have one. Mine is somewhere around here but not handy, so just smooth that out. And then I'm going to put the glue on this side. And the reason I just did one side at a time is I find the 3-in-1 dries fairly quickly. And I've also got a fan running in front of me right now. I hope it's not interfering with the sound, but it's quite warm today here, and gets a little warm in my craft room. So, okay. Okay, so that part is done. Whoops. Just got some bits of the tie back here. Just brush those off. Okay, and so now to wrap the cover, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to fold these sides down. And now what you want to do is you want to take some of this bulk away from the corners. And so I'm just going to come in and at an angle almost up to the corner, but you're going to leave about maybe 2 millimeters there, and then angle it back out. So it looks kind of like that. Okay, and I'm going to do that to all the corners. Now if you're not going to be sewing, you can use double-sided tape here. I don't like to use the double-sided tape if I'm going to be sewing through it. I find that it does kind of gum up the machine, and I get a lot more kind of broken threads and things when I'm using double-sided tape. So I'm just going to use the 3-in-1. I'm going right along the edge of the envelope there, and then just some on top. Okay, you're going to do the long sides first, and just pull that nice and tight around the edge of the envelope. Okay, really push that down. Okay, and what you'll notice now is that there is some areas where the embossed paper is lifting up, and I'm just going to go ahead in there with my glue and glue those down. Okay. That side's done. The lid on the 3-in-1 so it doesn't blob out the top. It's great glue, but if you leave it open, it tends to do that. Okay. And just going to repeat that for the other. Okay, now that I'm done the 2 long sides, I'm just going to trim these threads off now that it's glued down. Just don't want, when we put the paper on the inside, any threads to be hanging out. Okay, and now I'm ready to do the shorter sides. So with these, just make sure I'm in frame here, what I do is I kind of fold this corner in first. And that way you get a nice wrap around the corner. And if you don't get the corners perfect, it's not a big deal because you can always put the metal book corners on. They look great and they hide any mistakes you've made on your corners. So, and they're not expensive. I get mine off eBay and you get 100 for, I think, like $5 or something. So it's not that expensive. And again, you're going to wrap that nice and tight. Really push down those corners. Now I notice there's some white sticking out here. I am going to trim that away because when I put my paper on the inside cover, you will see a little bit of the edges where I've wrapped this, and I definitely don't want any white paper showing there. Get on this side, pull it up, and trim this back a wee bit. There we go. Perfect. And I'm going to put the glue again in under the edge here, where it's just separating from the bottom. Go. Okay, and I'm going to repeat that on the other side. Okay, so there is our wrapped cover. The corners actually turned out really nicely, so I'm happy. And here's what it will look like when it's ready. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to let this dry, make sure that the liquid glue, the 3-in-1, is completely dry, and then I am going to go around the outside edge of the cover with a zigzag stitch on my sewing machine. So I'll go ahead and do that and I'll be back. Okay, so I finished the stitching around the edge. I always start in the back corner. That way your back stitching is at the back. A little bit of an error here, but you know, I'm not upset about that because we're going to go in now again with the colors and just kind of touch up a little bit, maybe a little too much. You can still see what was where here. One more red down here, one more red over here. I have an apron on, I'm just wiping it on my apron. Okay. This is the orange, which I really like. Let's bring some more of that back in. Some more here. And over here. Okay. Purple. And the green. Okay, so I got a little bit more color on there now. I'm just wiping the colors off my fingers. And I'm going to come back in with the antique gold, and what I did on this cover is I went around all the stitching with it. Ooh, that's a little heavy. So if that happens, just kind of go back in with, let me see what I have here. Got a piece of towel. It's a little heavy, so you just rub it away a bit. There we go. That's okay. Just go along the seams. Take a little bit back up into those patches. Okay, so I think I've hit all the seams on the inside, and I'm just going to go around the outside edge with the gold, and you can see how it's kind of blending in with that stitching. So any of the, now this is 1, 2, 3, about 4 layers of paper in some areas, so wherever it's the sewing machine's had a bit of trouble getting through, it's kind of blending with that stitching and masking any stitching errors that happen. See, it's kind of masking the corner where the back stitching is and where the sewing machine got hung up a little bit here. Just cover that. There you go. Okay, and then I'm also going to go and do just the inside edge here, because you will see it when we put the paper on the inside of the cover. Okay, so that cover, I'm pretty happy with how that's looking. So it feels really good. I like the colors, they're showing up well. So there. That is the faux embossed leather cover technique. And so next step will be to assemble the signatures. I do have to coffee dye my pages that I'm going to be using for these journals, so I know there's lots of coffee dyeing videos out there, but if you want another one, let me know in the comments below, and I'll certainly figure out a way to set up in my kitchen so you can see how I coffee dye. And yeah, I'll be back with assembling the signatures, I think, in the next video, or coffee dyeing if you want to see it. Thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye.